Yes, all good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hi everyone, my name is Eunu Lee. I'm a principal engineer at WHP's Korea office. Before I begin, I'll just briefly about our office in Korea. We're located in Seoul, and we have around 200 employees. We're mainly focused on the properties and building sector in Korea, and as such, our main business line is construction management and supervision. But we also do a lot of transaction and development advisory because many of our clients are private equity and come from institutional investors. Having said that, I'll just go right into our today's presentation. So today I just want to talk briefly about a project that we implemented and completed earlier this year for one of our major clients, HP. So I'll go over some of the project details, some of the constraints that we have to work around with, and our approach and delivery method, and some key takeaways, and I'll end with a Q&A session. So HP implemented this project because they wanted to build a strategic global R&D center for their printing business, mainly centered on the A3 printer, and they chose South Korea as their location of choice for reasons that I'll explain a little later on. But the purpose of the project was for HP to consolidate formerly dispersed labs and offices dispersed around Korea, but also globally, and put that into a single building to streamline their operations and optimize their work. So as such, there was around 100 hard and soft labs. They were all built specifically tailored towards HP's needs. So key highlights: the building is five floors below ground, 7 floors above ground. The GFA is around 64,000 square meters. And the project began in December 2018 and lasted up to February 2022. So it was a 38-month project, but the design was for 20 months and the construction was for around 34 months. So as you can see with the schedule that it was a fast-track design and build sequence. The project total budget was around more than 300 million US dollars. This includes the land, construction, and professional fees and FF&E and so on. And through this project, we were able to save around 8% of PC claims. Our main role for the project was to dispatch a multidisciplinary owner's engineer and construction management team. And the main scope of works was contract, cost management, design, and interface management. And we also mainly implemented this project with a client-appointed PM, JLL, who are the program managers for HP. So this is the project organization. If you see, so Korea has primarily 3 different divisions. We have the engineering division and the project management and advisory division, which is called the global division. And we have the construction management division. So with HP's project team, we dispatched different specialists into this project team. And that team worked alongside JLL, who were in charge of the lab vendors. And we had one control tower, the HP client-side PM, and he was supported by numerous subject matter experts that brought the knowledge of HP requirements and guidelines into the project. Just to set the stage, so the constraints that we had to work around with in this project were mainly time constraint was a primary constraint. That was a driving factor that that drove our decision making for the project. And this time factor was associated to the fact that HP had acquired Samsung's printer business in 2017. And with this acquisition, it required HP to move out of Samsung's facilities by a set hard date. And so it was essential that we had to finish this project by this set hard date, which was around February this year. And the contract between our client and the developer was on a forward purchase agreement. So a forward purchase agreement is similar to a sales purchase agreement, except it's when the buyer agrees to buy to gain the ownership rights of that building once the building is completed, and the seller is obligated to build the building according to the buyer's requirements and guidelines. So this was set up in this way because the seller was the landowner, but they were also the general contractor. And with those multiple roles of the seller, that this caused a lot of contract conditions that worked in the favor of the seller, which was another major constraint that we had to work with. And by default, the seller became the general contractor. And the general contractor is a fairly large construction company in Korea, but up to now they were focusing mainly on residential buildings. So this was essentially their first high-tech facility. And because it was structured under an SPA, the design was also under the seller scope. So because of the lack of experience, it really meant that WSP and also JLL had to work closely with the general contractor to ensure that all of HP's guidelines and requirements were effectively transferred over to the design, and so that nothing was lost during the process of the design. Lastly, the final constraint that we had to work with was the fact that the lab vendors was under a separate contract. So the lab portion of the project was a owner-furnished, owner-installed feature. And since a lot of the lab facilities had to be built into the building, this meant that a lot of interfacing had to happen as the construction was going in progress. So amongst these constraints, I just want to talk about two aspects of how we delivered the project. I'm just going to focus on time management and cost management. So this is a high-level schedule of the project, and with this, I'll be able to show how we implemented the fast track methodology. So in December 2018 is when the SPA was signed, and at the time the seller had original building permit in place, and it was for sort of a typical office building. And in Korea, the design process mainly revolves around three different packages. You have your concept design, which can also be called the schematic design. You have your design development stage, and then you have your construction documents. So usually the permits are normally issued after the design development 100% package, and the final BOQ is usually agreed after the construction document package is delivered. So we were able to commence the construction using the original permit May 2019. At this time, we didn't know exactly how the building would look like, what kind of features will be included, and how much the building would cost. So as we were progressing the construction, at December 2019, around 8 months later, is when finally the new change permit was issued. At that time, we're around 5% construction progress rate, and also around 80% civil works were completed at the time. And then finally, after 20 months of design, it was delivered, and this was at a stage where the construction was around 14% progress rate. And shortly after, the general contractor, the seller, submitted the final cost, and it took us about 1.5 to 2 months to fully negotiate the building price. And so the final cost was locked in at around 24% of construction progress rate. And then the labs began to be installed 2021 August. This is about 8 months before being handed over to HP. And then finally, we received the occupancy permit January this year, and the building was handed over to our client February. So the main strategy to deliver this project under this fairly tight time period, again, we opted for the fast track design build strategy. And to do this, it was really important for us to understand the legacy permit parameters and the constraints that the legacy permit had, and to try to work around those parameters, but also to utilize it to the best of our advantage for the building. One example was we didn't want to change the volume of excavation and depth of excavation because that would trigger a longer change permit period. But we also wanted to have a new additional basement floor. So the idea here was to essentially lift the building slightly so that it gave room for that extra basement floor without having a lot of extra excavation volume. And during this design period, it was really important for us to understand HP's design guidelines. And so we held numerous knowledge transfer sessions to ensure that local designers, builders, suppliers were able to understand these requirements, but it was also to try to localize the client's global requirements into Korea's setting. So I called this the zero loss, zero creep because it was important that nothing was lost as we were designing, but also it was important that as we localize the global standards into this building, that there will be no scope creep. It was also very important for us to know that the developer had certain rights as a seller, but since they were also the general contractor, we had to try to balance out how much control we'll have over their work. Finally, we were able to achieve around 16 months of time that was saved. So had this been a regular design build sequence, it would have been 16 months longer. And we were able to achieve this through what I call the front-loaded design optimization. And this is where it required all that knowledge transfer to happen early on, so there was minimal design change later on in the project. And it was actually our KPI to try to manage change orders under 3% of construction cost, and we were able to achieve that by having around 2.5%. Moving on to contract and cost management. So as I mentioned, this project wasn't structured under a conventional procurement but it was such as an EPC or a design build. Due to the relation of the seller and the land, it was under a SPA, and then there was a development agreement that became an addendum to the SPA. So it was a development agreement where all these requirements and guidelines were included, and this is where the build-to-suit concept kind of steps in. But a huge lesson learned from this project was in the contract, there was some language that referred to guaranteed maximum price. And the international understanding of this term is a GMP is essentially a cost plus fee with a price cap, and this price cap is set at prior to design completion. And with the GMP, you will be able to have the building cost continuously changing until the project completion. And there are some advantages to this. It protects the owner from cost overrun, and it shows them against design changes, but it also provides the general contractor some assurance that they could factor in budget for some known unknowns early on. But to fully implement the GMP, you do need a robust QS capabilities to assess claims. So we thought this project was under sort of a guaranteed maximum price structure, but it turns out that the local interpretation was quite different. The local interpretation of the contract conditions was that the GMP was only an illustrative number for the purchaser's budgeting, but it wasn't binding for the seller, and thus the cost was subject to change only until the final building price was negotiated at the end of design. And once that happens, the subcontractor procurement packages would no longer become visible to us. And at the same time, according to the contract, how they interpreted it, all design ambiguity, omissions, and errors was to be borne by the purchaser. And this was sort of a contradiction because the design was under the seller's scope. So the lesson learned here is that it turns out the local interpretation of how the contract was set up was they had it right. So the guaranteed maximum price wasn't fully integrated into the contract. And so we found this out about a third way into the project. So we had to quickly adapt with the constraints that we had. So this is a snapshot of sort of the cost management that the approach that we took. So early on during the civil works, it was a purely cost plus fee structure because we were really just excavating to unknown amount. So during this time, we were able to do monthly open book cost assessment. And then once the change permit was issued after design development 100% stage, it quickly reverted to this adapted cost plus fee approach. So during this time, it was our aim to expedite as many subcontract procurement packages as possible. And in this project, we had 39 subcontract procurement packages, and we knew that once the building price was agreed, we won't have visibility to these subcontract procurement packages. So we pushed as much as we could prior to that building price agreement, and we were able to push forward around 53% of contract value before the building price was agreed. At this time, we saved around 3% of GC claims. And then once the building price was submitted by the contractor, there was a one-time negotiation event, which lasted around 2 months. And this time is where we negotiated on the final 21 procurement packages. And effectively, we were able to save around 10% of GC claims. Once this was locked in, the building price became a fixed price, but then there were also change orders that followed according to the contract conditions of the ambiguity, omissions, and error. And it was through these change order processes where we really had to find ways to leverage contract constraints to the best of our advantage. And we actually managed to save around 50% of GC claims, resulting in less than 3% of total construction cost in change orders. So again, the strategy was to expedite as many subworks procurement as possible. We managed to do around 54% of construction value at the stage of 24% construction progress rate. And for that one-time cost building price negotiation, to be prepared for that, we started to build our case early for cost reduction by leveraging our local construction and materials market insight. And finally, we really broke down the contract conditions to see how we can take advantage of some of these conditions to limit the seller change request. And this was done by determining if a certain change is really a design omission, error, ambiguity, or if it was due to seller negligence. The final outcome was we were able to save around 8% of total GC claims, and WSP was able to provide around 24 times the value for money to HP, which is roughly the US service or WSP's quantity surveying service value compared to the total cost savings that we achieved for HP. So the key takeaways was our role at large was project construction management, contract management, design management. But in reality, the real value that we were able to add was as an international consultant working in a local environment, we were able to counterbalance a very local developer for our international client and thereby safeguarding their interests. And we were also able to bridge that cultural knowledge business gap using our local expertise. And we were also able to understand the client's global standards and requirements, but also to adapt that into local code and also have the client buy into a lot of the restrictions that the local code will put on their standards. So, and then we were also able to leverage contract conditions for cost, time, quality negotiations. Finally, we were able to tailor our management according to the client's needs and project conditions to the success of the project. And finally, the lessons learned from this project was leave no room for local interpretation of international terms. And this basically means we cannot assume that because we're using these international terminology in the contract that those terminology will automatically be accepted and agreed by the local counterpart. So it's important to really define and spell out what these terms mean so that there's mutual understanding prior to project kickoff. Another lesson learned that we were able to achieve was gain early buy-in with change processes. And then lastly, it was to ensure back-to-back subcontract to contract clauses for tool adoption. We wanted to use a lot more digital tools for project implementation, but again, we didn't stipulate some of these in the contract, and we had assumed that the general contractor and the counterparts will be able to adopt some of these digital tools, but because it wasn't stipulated in the contract, they didn't feel the obligation to do so. So we lost some opportunities there. So these are just very high-level lessons that we had to learn as we implemented the project. But overall, it was a very successful project for the client, and also it was a very learning experience also for WSP Korea. So this is the presentation. I'm done, and just hand it back to Sharon for any questions.
Thank you, Eunu, for a fantastic presentation, and it's so nice to have this presentation following on the International Project Management Day. If you can just move to the last slide with your contact details. Thank you. So just some housekeeping items before we continue with the Q&A. You can log your questions in the question box on the GoTo webinar control panel, and also for the presentation slides, if you can please send a message to to request these slides. So I will start with the first question. What type of contract form was used for the project? Was it NEC, FIDIC, or Korea local government? Thank you.
Yeah, because it wasn't, as I mentioned, a conventional procurement, we didn't have the chance to use, for example, FIDIC, where it would be like for regular EPCs. In this case, because it was for an SPA and development agreement, it was really customized to the project. So finally, it was more adopting Korean local standard general contracting terms but again, customized towards this project. So it didn't really utilize these international contracts just mentioned.
Thank you. If there was an opportunity to rewrite the contract, what will be the one clause you would change?
So the term that kept coming back to us and in a way that it limited our management was the clause where the design omission, any design omission, ambiguity or error, the cost will be borne by the purchaser. So this was something that can happen in a where the seller or where the buyer is in charge of the design and they hand it over to the contractor. But in this case, because the design was under the seller scope, there was sort of a contradiction to have this clause in the contract. So if we had not had that clause in the contract, it would have been a lot easier for us to manage the change orders. So this is something that I would take out of the contract if I had the opportunity.
Thank you. How did COVID impact the schedule of the project?
Overall, it didn't impact the schedule, thankfully. We did have a few occasions where there were small outbreaks of COVID, but overall, the general contract was very good at maintaining and adhering to the government regulations in terms of how a construction site can operate during these times of COVID. We did have some issues with materials procurement, but again, finally, it didn't impact the overall schedule. So to that end, it was good that we weren't impacted by COVID.
Thank you. How was the different interpretation on GMP concluded between the developer?
Yeah, because it took us a while to really accept the fact that that GMP wasn't interpreted the way we wanted it to be. We had to have numerous sessions with the client lawyers to see what they meant when they were drafting the contract. But once we realized that the local interpretation was correct, that's when we just decided, okay, we need to work with what we have. This is a limit. This is a constraint. And so we were honest with the general contractor that we're disappointed that we couldn't fully utilize the GMP structure, but in the end it was sort of done in an amicable way where we both had an alignment on how to continue to proceed with the constraints that the contract provided.
Thank you. Was WSP able to conduct the QS work independently or through a third-party quantum expert?
We actually did this all independently because many of our engineers have quantity surveying experience. So normally this will be built into our construction management services. So in this case, it was all in-house.
Thank you. How did you facilitate the knowledge transfer to the developer?
Design workshops were happening almost weekly during, especially the intense periods of design early on. And then we would have special workshops where a lot of the HP subject matter experts would also come for these sessions and transfer that knowledge. And we also tried to have different interviews with the subject matter experts so that, because it was really important for WSP's team, but also JLL's team to understand what these requirements are and then to relay that to the general contractor. So these design updates were happening weekly, and then we had periodic special sort of workshops where we really deep dive into certain important topics of the design.
Thank you. The next question is about liquidity damages, LD. The question is, did the LD procedures in the contract varies in international contracts terms or local standards?
If I remember correctly, it was, again, it was local terms. Thankfully, we didn't have to initiate or trigger any liquidated damages on either side. But if I remember, it was a certain percentage that's stipulated under the Korean law.
Thank you. Can you share with us some of the innovative features of the building?
Yeah, there were a lot of innovative features to the building. A lot of it also proprietary to HP, but one building aspect was we wanted to make this building adaptable as possible for future changes. We knew that HP, the industry itself, would be continuously changing since it's a technology-based business, and which will require these labs to be reinstalled, taken apart, removed. And these lab facilities and chambers are actually very large in size. So once you get them into the building, it's very hard to get them out. So throughout the building, we had these sort of collapsible equipment hatches that can be continuously used whenever we needed to change major equipment. And this wasn't actually implemented in the building early on. This was something that we were creative with later on when we realized that the building needs to be a little more adaptable to future changes. So this is something that was quite innovative.
Thank you. I will take the last question. This question we received from someone who registered before the webinar. So the question is, any advice for fresh engineers with not a lot of managerial knowledge, where and how you gain such experience?
Yeah, I also began, I have an architectural background and I did begin with design work, but I also got into project management very early. And with project management, I realized it's if you know the right tools of how to manage a project, the details can come from subject matter experts. But as a project manager, you don't need to always know the details of each of these individual sort of specialty trades. But if you know how to sort of become a control tower, this is a skill set that can be learned, I think, in any stage of your career. You don't have to necessarily be at such a senior level. And so it's really becoming familiar to know how to work with different engineers, in this case, because we're focused on the engineering sector, and just familiarizing yourself with different requirements that each engineer or each discipline would have, and then trying to combine that and create a skill set where that can be transferable to any type of project, regardless of the building type or the engineering type. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's to really just to reach out to seniors, to reach out to subject matter experts, and try to make their knowledge your own, and then combine that with your own tools and skill sets for project management.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eunu, for fantastic presentation. And thank you for everyone for asking all these questions. There are a few questions unanswered that will be answered directly via email. So again, happy International Project Management Day, everyone. And thank you, Eunu, for a fantastic presentation. For additional questions, feel free to reach out to the presenter via the contact details shown on the screen. So thanks again, everyone. I will wrap up the webinar now. Thank you.
Thank you.